Welcome back to another session of War Chat. We're joined by Warchant.com senior writer Corey Clark and resident historian. I'm going to throw that title on you all the time, Corey.
Good.
Corey S. Clark, especially when we're talking about old games like this, and your input is invaluable in some of this stuff. And this has been tough for me, Corey, because we want to go through the most gut-wrenching losses of all time. And we did so. We went through kind of the ones that just missed the cut and the bottom five. Out of the top five, and you've got a companion piece on warchant.com you can read about. And before I do these, I like to go back and read go back and look at the write-ups after the game and maybe see some of the highlights, which is great on YouTube. We're able to do that. Man, it was painful. These last few that we're going to go through today, the top five or bottom five, whatever you want to call them, man, it was gut-wrenching again for me to relive some of these games and the heartbreak and how Florida State lost some of these games. So, I mean, let's trudge through it. Let's get through it and talk about some of the stuff. So, up to number 5 now, which is Florida State against Virginia. Now, this is an epic game. All the fans know what I'm talking about. Work done, stopped on the 1 foot line, of course. In a game, Florida State had – I guess the thing that makes this game gut-wrenching is Florida State had won, I believe, was it 29 in a row to that point, Corey, in the ACC, something like that?
I mean, maybe not. It could have been 29.
It was. Yeah, I just looked back at my notes. Yeah, they'd won 29 straight ACC games since joining in 1992, going to this game. So when you went into an ACC game, Corey, you just expected you're going to win. The thought, it wouldn't even enter your mindset that they could lose a game to a team like this.
Yeah, and I remember watching it at the time. In a halftime, I think Virginia was up. I know it was close. And I remember thinking, oh, this is kind of cute. Like, Florida State's actually being challenged. This is pretty cool. You just knew that Florida State's offense was so good because at that time, you remember, they were averaging over 50 points a game. They had scored 70 multiple times that season or close to it. They at one point they were averaging more points than there were minutes in a game through the first 3 weeks of the season. So they had such an incredible offense that you're like, okay, they'll find it. It's cool that Virginia's keeping it close and it's national TV. But yeah, by the fourth quarter, this should be a 2-touchdown win. And what you realize looking back at that game is, man, that was a loaded Virginia team.
Yeah.
Like, that wasn't just a mediocre ACC team that sprung up one day. That team had a bunch of NFL dudes on it, including the Barber brothers. James Ferrier, I think, was the linebacker. They had some Poindexter. They had some real good players on that team. And, there was nothing fluky about it. It wasn't like Florida State had to play terribly. Number one, Florida State's defense in 95 was not very good. It was not the strength of the team. By Florida State standards, it was not very good. So them giving up that many points, you figure they'd probably give up somewhere in the 20s. They gave up 26 to Duke. So Virginia scoring 33 points wasn't really a surprise. It's that Florida State only scored 28, and because that was well below what they were averaging. And that was I just remember watching it being just like stunned. Number one, I love the play call. I don't know what do you think of the play call at the end?
No, I like it. I mean, you're putting the ball in your best player's hands. On that thing. I don't think they're expecting it. And it should have, if not for Anthony Poindexter's insane play, when you go back and replay and the way he was able to make that tackle and stop Dunn, even though Dunn says he got in, I do think he was a couple inches short. The way he was able to hit the ball, because Dunn's helmet gets in and all that, but he hits the ball just right, so he can't get that over the goal line. I thought it was a great play, and I think, Dunn scores 9 times out of 10 on that play. It was just a tremendous defensive play by Poindexter to keep them out. They should have won the game. And I agree with you, Corey. This was a really good – it's probably maybe been the best ACC team Florida State had played to that point.
Yeah.
Especially when you go back and look at the number of guys. I mean, there's some write-ups about the number of guys. There was like 40, 50 guys that went on to play in the NFL that were in this game on both sides of the ball. And I think looking back, I know going in as a fan, and I wonder if this happened a little bit to the players, Virginia was 6-3 going into this game. But what was interesting, if you remember, they played at Michigan –
yeah,
start the season, they lost by 1 point. I remember watching that game, rooting. I'm cheering for the ACC, wanted to beat Michigan. I could not believe how George Welsh just blew that game. Horrible coaching at the end. They had Michigan beat. They should have beat them. And they also then had to go to the road. They lose by 1 point to Michigan. Then later in the season, they go on the road at number 18, Texas. So you're playing at Michigan, at Texas. You lose by them to 1 point.
Right.
And you lost. I don't know how they lost to North Carolina, but they also lost to North Carolina. So you're going in there 6-3. This is an okay, above average. But no, they were a lot better than the record indicated.
Yeah, the one thing that the one thing that's always bothered me about that game, because like I said, it didn't seem fluky watching it. It wasn't like Florida State just had a bunch of terrible turnovers or Virginia got lucky with some pick sixes and some block punts. Virginia moved the ball. They had Tiki Barber. I mean, you had Warwick Dunn and Tiki Barber in the same game. But the one thing that Virginia did that I didn't think Florida State did enough of is Virginia used Tiki Barber.
Yeah.
I believe Danny Cannell threw 68 passes in that game, which is just nuts. I mean, I think Florida State ran maybe 100 plays or close to 100 plays of total offense. But I know Cannell was good, and he had Andre Cooper and E.G. Green and the like. But, man, you got Warwick Dunn and Rock Preston back there. Just run the ball. Like, you don't have to throw it 68 times. And I think he threw 35 incomplete passes in a game, which might be a record for a Florida State game, 35 incomplete passes. I think he still threw for a ton of yards, obviously. He completed 33. But I think with that, like, it played into their hands a little bit. Like, but you had a lot of quick 3-and-outs, getting pressure, having to throw the ball away. When you have the best player in the game, in my opinion, in number 28, ride them a little bit more than they did. I think they tried to keep, like, putting the game, like, okay, let's bombard them with our athletes and we'll win this game, instead of just maybe being a little more patient and running the ball with Warwick Dunn and Rock Preston.
Yeah, it was 193 yards rushing for Tiki Barber in that game. So, I mean, had 111 in the first half. So he ran all over Florida State. And you're right. Florida State just bombed away. But, I mean, the game was close the entire time, so there's no reason to abandon the running game there. So that was a tough one. We all remember Florida State's first loss. Now we got to get the last four. We're going
I wanted to say something real quick about that, Gene, about that game. And I can't remember who the linebacker was. Maybe it was Poindexter. But on that play, and I don't think he got in either. I think it was really close. I think today it would have been a 12-minute review, but I don't think he got in. But I remember a linebacker saying that when he was being interviewed after the game, number one, I loved the play call. I just thought they had already tried to fade to Cooper. I'm sure that's what Virginia thought. Not in a million years did they think Dunn would be getting the direct snap. But a linebacker said, and this is just what I love about sports and what I love about football. And maybe it was Poindexter, but he said, I started screaming that Warwick Dunn was about to get the snap. He goes, because the whole game, Warwick Dunn would be looking at the defense. He would be looking at me, or he would be looking at the safety. He'd be reading where the hole was going to be, or if he was going to go wide, who was going to be covering him. But that was the one play where he was looking at the center, and only the center. So he's like, that's when I knew that Warwick Dunn was going to get the ball. So I started screaming to my teammates that he's about to get the ball. And whether that's true, whether that's hyperbole after the fact, embellishing it, if that's true, that's a really cool moment. It just something, attention to detail that you don't think in a moment like that, but somebody notices, hey, he's looking at the center. He hasn't looked at the center all game.
Well, especially with the game on the line, your final play, to get a small nuance like that, if that's true, like you said, that's pretty unbelievable. And it makes sense because Warwick Dunn's not used to taking snaps, so he's probably going to be a little bit more deliberate, looking at the center, making sure he gets that snap when normally there's no reason to look there. Interesting.
I was wrong. Cannell was 32 of 67.
Okay. 67.
For 454 yards.
Unbelievable. Now, here's what sucks about the last four we're going to get into. We're going to have to talk about that team down in Coral Gables, 3 of the next 4. Well, and it is what it is. I mean, they were the gut-wrenching – when you talk about gut-wrenching losses, Miami usually comes to mind, and they sure do in this one. So we're going to start with number 4, the 2002 Miami game. This was the infamous wide left game, and I remember being down there. And your memories of this is I remember Greg Jones running wild over him. And usually when a team runs this well against the other team, they win in this series. That was not the case in this one, despite him running wild. And what I remember sitting on the sideline, I don't know, were you there as a fan, Corey?
I was not, no.
Okay. So I'm on the sidelines, and I'm looking up, and Florida State's leading 27-14 in the fourth quarter. And anybody who has lived through Miami games knows about that weird 1-point thing. When there's a way to lose by 1 point game, 1 point Florida State will every time. And statistically, they do. I mean, they lose. I think this would be the 7 1-point loss in the series after this one. And I looked up there in the fourth quarter and I go, I don't like 13 points. I cannot stand that it's 13 points. It's just going to gives Miami enough room to get 2 touchdowns and win the damn game by 1 point. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and you mentioned Greg Jones. We'll get to the heartache at the end. But I just looked it up. He ran 31 times for 189 yards. And not to be outdone, Nick Maddox ran 12 times for 74 yards. So your 2 tailbacks had 263 yards rushing. You win those games because Ricks was Ricks threw for 83 yards in that game.
But he didn't lose you the game.
He didn't. No, he didn't throw any interceptions. In fact, I think Gardner and Anquan had 2 crazy catches on that final drive to get them in field goal range. Just ridiculous, just jump up and make plays, catches. You wish you had maybe a little more of a known commodity at quarterback that could have taken advantage of when you had the lead, because I don't know if you remember this, Gene. They had the 27-14 lead and then got a stop. And so we're getting the ball back in the fourth quarter with a 2-touchdown lead. Already, probably 9 minutes left, 10 minutes left to go in the game. And you're getting the ball around midfield. And if you had a quarterback maybe that you could trust a little bit more, that's a chance when you can put the game away. That's a chance because the whole team is ganging up on number 6 at this point because they know he's getting the ball. And so if you have a guy that you can trust to make a read, make a play fake, and make a throw, I know you're trying to run some clock, but even little simple throws just to keep the chains moving and keep the clock moving, but they couldn't. They had 2 or 3 straight 3-and-outs, and Miami did what Miami does. And I'll never understand. And look, I love the guy to death, but I'm looking at it right now. Greg Jones scores on an 11-yard run with 11:44 to go to put them up 26-14. Why in the world don't you go for 2?
Yeah.
It makes no sense mathematically to kick an extra point there. There is no difference, really, honestly.
Miami's not going to get
no
a touchdown and 2 field goals. Miami's not getting 2 field goals and a touchdown that amount of time left.
Yeah, there are 4 field goals. There's no difference between a 12-point lead and a 13-point lead. You have to go for 2 right there. And then maybe if it's 28-28, the pressure isn't on Bethia isn't as much like when Hopkins boomed the 55-yarder because it was a tie game.
Yeah.
But he missed the 2 kicks where they were trailing. There's just a little less pressure when you're in a tie game. So maybe he kicks that thing straight pure through the uprights. Just a bizarre decision that didn't cost them the game, obviously, just a bizarre coaching decision.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think this was – I don't remember if it was Miami's first touchdown or their one that went ahead to take the lead. But there was it was a Rufus Brown. There was a throw that was right between the numbers on him that he dropped that would have ended the game right there. I don't remember. Do you remember what series that was? Was that the last of the second?
I do remember it being the fourth quarter, being like, of course you didn't catch that. I remember Kyler Hall had an interception in that game, and he didn't have many in his career, but he had one in that game. And remember, Miami is Miami now, and I guess we could say Florida State is Florida State now. But this Miami team had won, I don't know how many games in a row, Gene, a ton, like 25 in a row at this point. They were loaded with first-round picks. They were the defending national champions. They were number 1 in the country. You had lost to Louisville 2 weeks before, a bad Louisville team in the rain. Even though Florida State was 12th to 13th, they were a pretty decided underdog going into that game. And you outplayed Miami for the first 50 minutes. And then, of course, your offense stops moving. And then Miami makes play after play. I know they hit a screen pass or a little crossing route that was a 60, 70-yard game that got them right back in it. And you knew, Gene, you're right. You knew when it was 27-14, not because Florida State had a history of blowing leads at that time in 2002, because they were just coming off the dynasty, but because it was Miami. And it was a great Miami team. You can't give them life. And once Miami had life, and once that place came alive, and then Sean Taylor helicoptered PK Sam, and all those things happened in the fourth quarter, that place was going nuts. And, of course, you missed the field goal. Why would you make the field goal?
Yeah. No, I looked at it. It was, you're right, 27 in a row. Miami had won in a row going into that game. So you had a chance to knock off the top team, one of the best all-time Miami teams that were, and there are a lot of great ones, in their home stadium. And there was so much where it would have vanquished so many demons, I think, if you were able to go down there and do that. I think that's what makes this was why this is in the top 5. I mean, you were a big underdog, so maybe you shouldn't be as upset that you lost the game, but it's how you lost the game. In the fact that you could finally get that monkey off your back, and you blew it in the same way that Florida State has done it time and time again against Miami. So I think to me,
missed kick, another missed kick.
And then to add the salt in the wound right at the end before we move on here, Corey, he misses the kick. We've all seen it. And then the little student manager on the side, ugly dude with the big giant ears screaming at Bethia on that play.
Yeah, I think I remember Coker being asked about that, like on the Monday afterwards, and said he's no longer a part of the program. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Coker was, I don't know, horrified. That might be too strong. But he was very upset when he saw that picture because that's not Larry Coker. Like maybe Jimmy Johnson wouldn't have cared, but Larry Coker doesn't need some idiot manager taunting a kicker at a game. Like it just was an awful look. I know it's what we perceive Miami to be anyway. But yeah, just an awful, awful look. And whoever was walking with Bethia at the time, would have had every right to pick that dude up by the collar and throw him 30 feet and just beat the bejesus out of him. Because who are you? Didn't do anything but stood on the sideline to mock and dance around and skip around like a little sprite around the field goal kicker. But also make a kick.
Yeah.
Any of you guys, I'm talking to make a kick. Make a kick in the final seconds. You know how statistically impossible. Well, we're getting other games. Keep going.
Yeah. That's we'll have another one to talk about here in a little bit, Corey. Another one, so we'll be okay there. All right, now one that did not come down. Well, not necessarily. There were some missed kicks in the game, but didn't come down to a kick. Another 1-point loss to Miami, and that is the 1987 one. I was a student at Florida State at the time, and I kind of remember a game here or there from back when I was in school the first year or two. But this is the game that just absolutely rips your soul out when you're there to see this. Again, Miami number 3, Florida State number 4. I think, was this the first top 5 matchup between these two teams in 87 probably?
I would have to imagine, yeah.
Probably absolutely. Was. So, I mean, it was the first time it's national. It was a big stage for this thing. You had the Deion Sanders. You had the Michael Irvins. I looked it back up. I knew it was a large number. ABC had a write-up after the game. They said there were 63 players in this game that went on to play in the NFL. So, I mean, the talent was obvious. When you watch a game like this, it is so well played. It's hard-hitting. Guys are executing. They're great athletes all over the place. It was just a great game to watch, but it wasn't so great to see Florida State once again get way up in a lead. I guess it was a pattern. We started to see that, and it continued the next several years. Get a lead, dominate the game, and then all kind of wacky stuff started happening near the end of the game. And Florida State, again, then they come back, which is crazy. They come back and have a chance to tie it. And I've heard different versions of what happened. The players talk Bobby Baldonado going for 1 to tie the game, and he went for 2, and that obviously didn't work. And again, you lose to Miami by 1. They win the national championship. You finish 11-1 and number 2.
And it wasn't, Gene, when you think about, I made this same argument for the 92 team. I think that if they would have gone for if he would have made that field goal and they'd have tied Miami, Florida State plays for the national championship. I think even more definitely that if Florida State ties that game, they play for the national championship. Because if you look at the stats from that game, again, I think Sammy Smith ran for 189 yards. I think Florida State had 450 or so yards of offense. They dominated that game. It wasn't like a back and forth or Miami was getting unlucky. Florida State was in control of that game. They were up 19-3. They were up 19-3, and they end up scoring. They lose by a point. So for the people that don't know, a little younger listeners or younger viewers, Derek Schmidt finished his career as the all-time leading scorer in NCAA history. He was the first great kicker. No, he wasn't. Bill Capice. There was a guy before him. But Derek Schmidt was a great kicker. And it had been great. That was his senior year, I believe. It had been great his whole career. Well, in that game, he misses an extra point, which I think he missed 3 in his whole career. He also missed a 30-yard field goal late that would have given Florida State the lead. Like I think it was 19-19. He misses a 30-yard kick, which he didn't miss those. Yeah. And then Irvin scores on the long touchdown to give them the 26-19 lead. There was also a play. So not only have you missed an extra point in a field goal, a short one, there was a play where he was lining up for another field goal early in the game. And I don't know if you remember this. McManus used to be the holder. He was also the quarterback. It's probably going to be a 40-yard attempt. Well, the long snapper thinks he hears McManus call for the ball. So he snaps it while McManus is still looking back at Derek Schmidt. The ball goes 50 yards in the other direction. If you look in the stats, Florida State has like a minus 51-yard rush because of this play. That Miami recovers it, and that's how they score their first points. So you go from scoring and taking a lead to then Miami having the ball in almost your red zone on one bad field goal snap. So those 3 things happen. If any of those 3 things don't happen, Florida State doesn't have to go for 2 at the end of the game. Just bizarre that it kind of came down to – it didn't come down to Derek Schmidt, but Derek Schmidt, who was good and was good in big moments and in big games, just struggled that day when you didn't need him to struggle.
Well, yeah, it's crazy. Like you said, it's a 1-point game, and a really good kicker has the worst game of his career, missing 2 chip shot field goals and an extra point. That just doesn't happen. And that's one of the things I went back and looked at that replay, and that miss kicked in the fourth quarter, the 30, I think it was 31 yards. It was a windy day. I don't know if you remember that. If you look at the kick, it's lining up, it's going to go in, and then it just drifts. The wind grabs and it just drifts enough to the right to miss it again. It's something silly like that. And then, I mean, what's crazy too, I mean, you have even in the fourth quarter too, Florida State's in a point to put it away. They get it on Miami's 11-yard line. They're already up. They're getting ready to put this game out of reach, and Danny McManus misses the snap.
Yeah.
And one of the Blades brothers recovers it, and that's when they go down and score a touchdown on that. It's just, all game long, fourth quarter, suddenly Danny McManus can't take a snap from center.
And what, back then, Miami, this was the first year of the dynasty. So Florida State had been pretty good the last 6 or 7 years, but not great. We knew how good that Miami team was. That Miami team had just played for the national championship. I know they didn't have Testaverde the next year. They had Steve Walsh, who was pretty darn good too. But that was a great Miami team, and you outplayed them really the whole game. They had a couple – Michael Irvin. For some reason, Dion wasn't covering him on that long touchdown. In the
that drove me nuts
gave
too.
them the lead. But you realize at that moment – I don't know that we realized just how good Florida State was. But it is heartbreaking as that was, and that was that was as heart-wrenching a loss as you can have. It becomes more heart-wrenching in hindsight too, right? When you see that Miami didn't lose a game. That was as close as they ever came to losing a game that year, by far. So they go undefeated. You win the rest of your games, including beating the dog tar out of Auburn. I don't think that's a phrase, dog tar. But you beat I was going to say dog something else. You beat the tar out of Auburn at Auburn. And you beat Nebraska in the Fiesta Bowl. Well, yeah, it turns out the two best teams in the country were playing that day. That was the national championship game. We didn't know it at the time, but that was the national championship game. And if Bowden goes for 2, I think they scored with, 30-something seconds left, Gene?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? The throw to it was Ronald Lewis, I think, right? Wasn't it Ronald Lewis that caught the touchdown there at the end? And
yeah, Ronald Lewis, yep.
42
I think
seconds. Dexter Carter had a big play on that drive, too. So if you just kick the extra point there, assuming he makes it, now again, that might have had something to do with it, that he was far from a sure thing right there.
Bowden said that in a post-game quote. He said he was a little worried about the kick, too, because he struggled that day.
Which is always hard to coach when you can't count on that extra point. If you go for the tie there and then Miami takes a knee on the ensuing possession, I think you play and win the national championship. I do. I think you play for and I think you win the national championship. But I don't know. I remember being in the stands, Gene, and everybody around me, and I'm 12, but everybody around me, as soon as Ronald Lewis, as soon as the arms went up that it was a touchdown, everybody around me put up 2. All the fans around me said put up 2, like go for 2.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was a decision that the fan base at the time really respected. I still respect it because you want to win the game. And back then, obviously, they weren't overtimes. People like Pat Dye would play for ties. Bobby Bowden wasn't that guy, and that's why you loved him. That's why he was your coach, because he wanted to win. He would go for the win. It just Miami read the play perfectly, and the throw to Pat Carter was short, and it was getting batted down by Bubba McDowell. But I think it's the right decision. I think, but in hindsight, of course, Bobby Bowden didn't know that his team and that Miami team were going to go undefeated the rest of the year.
Yeah.
If he had, he probably goes for the tie, right? Because then you're playing for national championship.
Yeah. If you're gonna know you're gonna play for national championship, of course you would. Corey, I was one of those people in the stands. If you looked over in the student section, I was flashing the deuces for that too. It was unanimous. Everybody wanted to go for it, but it was not meant to be. But it was still a great team, fantastic game, fantastic afternoon. Just didn't like the result.
So right there at the end, that was a like a funeral walking out of that stadium.
Let's mix in one of these top 4 that isn't a Miami game, but it's another in-state rival. And that is the Florida Gators 1997 coming in at number 2 overall. And just like a lot of these ones at the top have a theme, it's like this is the game that probably cost you at least a chance to play in the national championship, if not the championship. And then to make it worse, it's against a rival. And to make it worse, it's a game you were winning and probably should have won, but you blew. So, you put all these things together, that's the definition of gut-wrenching. So, it's hard to beat 1997, Florida 32-29. Florida State was 10-0 going into this game, number 2 in the country. They were going to be playing for all they had to do is get by Florida. They're playing for the national championship probably. We'll see if they probably would have won it. We'll never know. And it drove me nuts to the whole Spurrier thing, the whole Brandeis switching back and forth with Doug Johnson. I really don't know what that accomplished in the game, but Gator fans made such a big deal out of it. I don't think that had anything really to do with it. But really nuts. You're dominating the whole game, but, it's still, to me, drives me nuts when you got down first and goal, I think on the 6-yard line, and I think you got down to the 2 or the 3. And this, we should have asked Mark Rickman. We had him on Warchant last week. about that play call because I had always heard that he had called a play action on that third down from the 2 or 3, whatever it was, to Melvin Pearson. If you look back at the play, Florida has all 11 guys in the box. I mean, that play I think would have been wide open. Bowden overrules, wanted to rely on the defense, ran it into the teeth, which is crazy on the play. If you look, it's a pitch to the short side of the field on the 2-yard line when they're stacking the box. I've never understood that play call.
No, it was they didn't bathe themselves in glory there when they got down to the inside the 10. The one thing I would say about that, because I've always that always irked me too, that whole series once they got down inside the 10, you're up by 1. To paint the picture, you're up by 1. A touchdown puts you up, obviously we can all do math, puts you up by 8, especially with Janikowski as your kicker. He's making it. So you're up by 8. But that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're winning that game because – obviously, Florida goes right back down the field, scores, I think, in 3 plays or 4 plays. So, but the best they could have done is tie instead of take the lead, and then you have a chance with Janikowski to maybe go down there and kick a game-winning field goal. It's just the whole game that bothers me more than that one play. Like, you were better than them. That was one of the best defenses Florida State's ever had. I don't know if the Doug Johnson, Noah Brandeis thing got in their heads. Fred Taylor was really good, but that was not a great Florida team by any stretch. They had lost by 20 points to Georgia, and Georgia never.
Yeah, how did that? I went to ask you that, Corey, too. I went back and looked at their season that year. It wasn't too bad. I think they lost another game by 1 point to somebody pretty good. But I mean, how in the world did Georgia blow this team out? They look great on that November afternoon in Gainesville.
Yeah, it was crazy. I went to that. It's the only time I've gone to a Georgia-Florida game. And I remember talking trash to Florida fans before the game because I knew I wouldn't be able to do it after the game. So I was trying to get all my shots in before the game thinking Georgia was going to lose by 3 touchdowns because Georgia always lost to Florida. And no, they dominated the line of scrimmage. Robert Edwards was really good and ran for 4 touchdowns, I think. But Florida couldn't block Georgia. Like, Georgia was in Doug Johnson's face the entire game, or Noah, whoever the quarterback was. And so you think that 97 Florida State defense – with Wadsworth and Spires and those guys. Yeah. Sam Cowart was great. You're like, okay, this isn't a great Florida offense. You give, although I think they still had Jacquez, obviously, we remember that, and they have Fred Taylor. But if you can hold them to 20, just 20, you're going to win the game. If the offense can score 21 points, they should win this game because this is a really good Florida State defense. It's not a good Florida offense. They don't have a ton of confidence. Because they lost to Georgia, they lost to LSU, and that was not the LSU we know today. That was a bad LSU team, and they weren't that good. But it's like the closer the game remained, Florida State jumped out to a 17-6 lead, and they had a chance there to put their foot on the throat and step on it, and they didn't. And Busby didn't play great, and it just that Florida kept it close, took the lead, I think, or got really close. Florida State retook the lead. And had a chance to go up by 8 that last possession and didn't get it done. And then somehow, some way, the very first play, when you're up by – even then, though, Gene, remember when they took the 4-point lead? So now – and you knew Janikowski was going to kick it out of the end zone. So I was saying to myself, man, that's fine. They're going to have to go 80 yards against the Florida State defense with Doug Johnson and Noah Brandeis alternating at quarterback. This should not be a problem. Florida State is in control. And in the very first play, you let Jacquez Green get loose for a 70-yard play, 60-yard play. It was just nuts on the very first play of that drive.
I was still I still thought they were going to win, but it was irked that they didn't. But I guess, like you said, technically they weren't putting the game away. But the absolute worst case scenario, you're in overtime if you get the touchdown there. But I was still irked at that. But You're right. I still felt, look, it was still a very good Florida State defense. Even Florida had done that much at that point. I go, this is not happening. Florida's offense is not that good. This is a dominating defense. No way with 2 minutes left are they going to be able to go down the field. They did. I mean, the first play, just a blown coverage. It's a good call by Spurrier. It was a blown coverage by the defense. And then I think once that happened, the momentum was gone. Florida State was not going to win that game at that point. You just had the feeling.
You just think, because I just looked it up. Yeah, Janikowski kicked that field goal with 2:38 left.
Yeah.
So you're like, okay, 2:38 left. They got to go 80 yards against your defense with not great quarterbacks. This shouldn't be an issue. Wadsworth and Spires will get to them. And then they scored, and Gene, it took them 48 seconds to score.
Yeah,
like Jacquez had the huge play. Fred Taylor runs him down to the 1, and then they give it to him again, and he's in the end zone. And even then, You're like, you know what? Okay, you're behind. It's 32-29. You still got a minute 50 left.
And but really, Corey, did you have at that point? I knew, I thought it was over. I guess again, it goes back to, I'm not trying to dog on Thad Busby, but it would be different if it's Charlie Ward or Danny Cannell or one of these other guys. I think Danny McManus. I think I would have had the confidence that they're going to go down and win. I just had a bad feeling in that environment. I had a tough time believing that Thad Busby was going to drive him down the field to do it. And
he did not. He threw an interception, I feel like, right to a linebacker,
pretty quick.
First or second play of the drive, and the game was over. And it wasn't just, okay, you lost to Florida. Yeah, you lost the national championship, at least the ability to play for it. Because if you win that game, you're playing Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. Michigan's also undefeated, and they're playing in the Rose Bowl. So if you beat Nebraska, you're at least getting a share. And I personally think if you beat Nebraska, you probably win both. You win back then it was the AP and the UPI and the coach. It's just goofy how they did college football. But I think you probably win both polls. But you're at least winning one of them, and you're going to be the national championship. You're going to be the national champion, but you lost to Florida for the second straight time.
Let's move out of Gainesville. Go back to Tallahassee for the last one, and this is the worst loss, gut-wrenching loss in Florida State history, at least according to Corey and myself. Other people may differ, but I think when I saw the nominations on the Tribal Council, Corey, without a doubt, these two were the first two mentioned. The 1991 Miami wide right one, and then the 97 Florida. It seemed to be in that order. So we seem to be on par. I think some people disagreed with some of our lower ones, but I think the top two, it's pretty much a consensus. And, of course, the 91 game, it's a game of the century. It's 1 versus 2. There was so much hype around this game. Florida State had lost 5 out of 6 to Miami going into this game. And again, it's the same narrative. They get up. They're up 16-7 in a defensive struggle. There's 10 minutes left, less than 10 minutes left in a game where you're in full control of. But again, it seems like at that point kind of madness ensues and all kind of crazy stuff happens. And Miami does what they've done several times, and they find a way to take the lead. And then you're in that position once again for that kick. And, we know what happens there.
Yeah, there were so many. Again, it's like the 87 game. This one was a little different for me because the 87 game, again, I think Florida State just dominated that game and just was completely unlucky to lose. I wouldn't call this 91 game a domination. I mean, you only scored 1 touchdown. You kept getting inside the 10 or 15 and then having to settle for field goals.
Well, your defense was dominating.
Defense was great, but Miami's defense
50 minutes.
But yeah, so, you can whittle it all down to, I was just looking at it. Do you remember who Miami's kicker was back then?
Was it Carlos Huerta?
Exactly.
But he was there for like 20 years, Corey, so it seemed like it was him.
But most Florida State fans can remember exactly who Miami's kicker was because he never missed.
Yeah.
In that game, it's 16-7. They drive into your territory, and you get the stop. And, of course, the dude splits it down the middle on a 45-yard field goal to make it 16-10. If he misses that, you're winning the game. But, of course, he doesn't miss it because he's not a walk-on. And you're using a walk-on because of things that had happened during that season that Jerry Thomas is the guy you've relied on. And credit to Jerry Thomas, he did make 3 field goals. It's not his fault that Florida State's number 1 offense kept having to settle for field goals because they couldn't convert. They couldn't get in the end zone. The only touchdown they got was Paul Moore, I think, on a 4th and 1, and he barely got in. There's a play where William Floyd, who's a freshman in that game, they're inside the 5-yard line. He's the lead fullback, and he gets absolutely decleated. That instead of having you're at the 5-yard line or thereabouts, and it's a first down run, he gets decleated back into the amp lead. And so it's like a 7-yard loss. And so all of a sudden now it's second goal from the 12. And William Floyd was a very good football player. We all know that it's a first-round pick. But that moment, he got the low man won in that one. And there were plays like that where, again, all these games come down to a few plays. I remember they had these things called Y hides where it would be like Weldon would roll all the way out to the right, looking like he's going to throw right. And then he's supposed to throw all the way back to Lonnie Johnson, who fell down blocking, and he's wide open in the end zone. I think it's Lonnie Johnson. It's one of the tight ends. And Weldon is getting hit as he throws. He's standing there by himself. It is a touchdown that anybody watching this could have caught and scored on. But he's standing there by himself. Weldon doesn't get enough on the throw. He tries to lean forward to catch it, and he ends up not scoring a touchdown. I don't even know if he caught the ball, but he was at the 2. And it was plays like that where you keep having to settle for field goals, where you keep Miami in the game. And that's exactly what happened. You kept Miami in the game. If you can make a couple of those touchdowns, then you're winning that game. I mean, Gino Toretta wasn't anything special, and he was terrible for most of that game. But you let him hang around, and then in the fourth quarter, Miami did what Miami's always seemed to do, and Florida State did what it always seemed to do.
Well, I'm going to see if I can do the old screen share here and show you.
All right, good.
This is, if I get this right. All right, so this is, if you can see this is probably the play where I screamed the loudest, that I was the maddest probably ever as a fan sitting in the stands. So you see on the side, we've got old, I believe that's old Horace Copeland there.
Yep.
Set this for you. This is a 4th and 7. Florida State's got the lead very late in the game.
16-10. Florida State's leading
16-10. It's a 4th and 7 with Horace Copeland. Now he's got Terrell Buckley is sitting there. You see him on the – so you see the line is that they need to get to at least the 5.5 to get the first down. And there's T-Buck sitting there going back 6 yards or 7, 8 yards back. And if I get the next photo up on this, if I can get it to do it here. All right, here's at the snap. Now T-Buck is at the 5. He's backpedaling at this play. In a 4th and 7, he ends up at the end of the play. When the pass is thrown, he's standing on the goal line, Corey. So this is, I am screaming. I'm 20 euros up on that side going, get up on him. What are you doing? And sure enough, they run a 8-yard route on a 4th and 7, and he picks that up. Of course, now they got 1st and goal at the 3.5, 4-yard line. And Miami's in 4-down territory. There's no way they're not scoring a touchdown on the 4-yard line with 4 plays to go on this one. And that was the game right there. I was so annoyed at that. Whether Miami gets a touchdown, if you get beat behind you and they get in the end zone, whether he gets that of the first down, it makes no difference. I do not understand to this day why T-Buck was playing effectively at the time when that ball was thrown. He was 12 yards off the receiver. I mean, off the line of scrimmage on a 4th and 7.
You know, I've asked him about that. I wrote a oral history on that game, the 20-year anniversary, so a decade ago now. Golly, we're getting old. And I remember him saying that, number one, the call, he wanted to be up man-to-man press coverage, but that wasn't the call. He was supposed to be playing off. The problem with that particular play is, if you can see in the image, he wants to be looking at Toretta, and he can't see Toretta because the other Florida State DB, I don't know who that, I can't see the number. I don't know who that DB is.
I think it might have been Knight, who's on the,
it might be
slot
Knight.
receiver.
So he's in his line of sight on Toretta. So he had to go back to be able to see Toretta. So on the very first picture you show, where you show him so far off, he said he backed up a couple extra yards so he could look at the quarterback. And it's something that he always regretted. That was Copeland ends up catching at the 3, Buckley tackles him and throws him to like the 12, but it didn't matter. His forward progress was the first down. And even then, even after they kicked to take the they score the touchdown, then of course they make the extra point to go up 17-16. You still got time, and Casey Weldon does lead them down the field.
Yeah.
And we always remember the missed field goal with good reason. It was a 34-yarder. But, again, I hate to do this, but I did it on the 93 game, the Nebraska game. I talked about this with Aslan. The clock management on that final drive.
Horrific.
Makes you want – if I had any hair, I mean, I guess I did at the time, I would have wanted to rip it out and throw it just throw my hair at people. Because there's a play where they think Edgar Finnick gets out of bounds. On a screen pass. Well, he didn't. He was ruled inbound, so the clock was running. So nobody on the sideline notices it for like 25. And again, you're in a 1 minute.
The write-up said 23 seconds were wasted after the play before they called timeout.
Yeah. So imagine. So when they kick that field goal, imagine having 23 extra seconds to work with. You're going to run the ball, number one, to the middle of the field. You might actually try to score a touchdown, but instead, because you had to use your timeouts, you don't feel comfortable with running a play and then running your field goal too long.
Right.
So those 23 extra seconds were critical. It's just a critical error. And you have too many people on that sideline to not be telling the coach. And I'm not putting it all on Bowden. He's got people up in the booth. He's got people on the sideline to tell him, hey, coach, the clock is running. The clock is running. Hurry up. Whether you call a timeout at then or you get the play in quicker. So anyway, they go down the field. And the play that I'll always remember is Eric Terrell, a Tallahassee kid, Godby, I think. Godby or Leon.
I believe
can't
that's
remember
the school.
He has one-on-one coverage, in the end zone. Weldon lofts it up to him, and Terrell was like the parade All-American. He never really did much at Florida State. This was his 1 year of playing, really. And he goes up for what could be a game-winning touchdown catch. He's interfered with, but he's getting pushed back as he's trying to catch it like this, and the ball just falls out of his hands. Now he's getting interfered with, so I'm not giving him – it's not like a drop necessarily. But for half a second, everybody in the crowd, including Keith Jackson, I think, thought he caught it and that he had just made the game-winning catch. Well, he didn't. He did draw the pass interference, though. So that got them to the whatever that would have been, the 17-yard line. And then that's when the kick happens. But that play, I'll always wonder, number one, does Casey win the Heisman if Terrell makes that catch? It's close. He finished second anyway, but that was with 2 losses in 2 back-to-back games. Number one, I think they beat Florida handily 2 weeks later.
They were emotionally done after. Obviously, the way this game played out, they had nothing left in the tank.
So there's a chance that he wins. There's a chance that he wins the Heisman. They certainly are playing for the national championship that year if he makes that catch. And then also, I wonder if Eric Terrell's career turns out different if he makes that catch. Like, if he makes that kind of play in that kind of moment, a kid with all that talent, that if you've ever read that book, St. Bobby and the Barbarians, where they followed that team throughout the 91 season, he's the most polarizing person in it. Like, he's so he's so talented, but he's so immature. And John Easton trying to get through to him. But anyway, so that play I'll always remember of him almost being the hero. And then obviously the kick, it just so happens that it's Florida State's luck that was the first year they had narrowed the goalposts by 3 feet, 1.5 feet on each side.
Right.
So if you watch the replay, if they were the goalposts of 1990, that kick is almost certainly inside the upright, and you take the lead. So I remember walking out of that stadium, and I wasn't 12 this time. I was 16, and I was so sure that was the team that was going to win the first national championship. Then it literally, I've never walked out of a stadium that quiet in my life. It was it was a funeral. It was so sad and somber. I remember we didn't stay in the parking lot after the game with my dad's buddies. We just got the car and drove home. It was just so demoralizing that no matter how – Florida State's had a bunch of tough losses, a lot of great wins too. There's nothing in my imagination that could ever top the heartbreak of that moment. That team was supposed to be the team. Casey Weldon, Kirk Carruthers, Marvin Jones, T-Buck, the whole gang, and then to lose in that kind of fashion. And then to watch them ripping up your turf on the field and celebrating afterwards.
And that damn bird running around doing the whole beak thing, or he does this thing or whatever.
Running out like he owns the stadium. Like it's his stadium that he could run out and celebrate a missed kick. But that was probably that kid ended up being the manager dancing around Bethia a few years later, the kid in the Ibis suit.
That would be a good story if he was a former Ibis. That would be appropriate.
That would make sense.
One other thing I just want to throw for a little context, a backdrop on this, and I think you're completely right about Florida State being emotionally spent. Obviously, it was the most gut-wrenching. We picked it, and I think most fans would agree, in FSU history. So obviously that has to have a huge impact on the players and even the coaches. You lose a game like this where you thought you had a won or you should have won. Got to remember, a couple of weeks before this, they played at Baton Rouge in a driving rainstorm where almost the entire offensive line got hurt. And I say that it's not an excuse. It happens in college football. You get key injuries. It was not the same offense that was going up against Miami, the one that early in the season. I looked up before that game, since in Corey, Florida State averaged over 41 points a game before that. In the last 3 games, because they only scored 9 against Florida and then 10 against Texas A&M in the bowl game. This was not the same offense that was run roughshod over people in the first 2-3 quarters of the season by the time they played Miami.
Yeah, and I think, though, if they win that game against Miami and then you have 2 more weeks to recover, because what an odd schedule, by the way.
Yeah.
What kind of schedule maker puts your last 2 games, Miami and Florida, with a week in between? So with an off week in between. So Florida State was 10-0, but their last 2 games were, number 2 Miami and then number 7 Florida. But I think if you win that game, Gene, because if you remember the Florida game, Weldon got beat to a pulp. I mean, I remember after the game, he had the big Band-Aid on his chin and blood everywhere. He got beat to a pulp. I think if you win that Miami game and you're still number 1 in the country and still playing for a right to play for the national championship, those offensive linemen are not healthy, but they're playing. But when they didn't have a chance of playing for a national championship after that loss, I think the offensive linemen rightly were like, look, let's not even try to get back. There's no reason really to play hurt or play injured. I'm not saying kids should play hurt or injured, but it's a fact of life in college football. They normally do, or they will, if something valuable is on the line. So Weldon was playing behind a second and third string offensive line against Florida and got just, mollywopped. I mean, he just took an unbelievable beating. By the way, in that game, I just looked it up. The wide right. Our man Kirk Carruthers had 3 sacks in that game.
Nice. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, him and Carl Simpson both had 3 sacks, and Marvin had 13 tackles. T-Buck had an interception. Like, everything played out perfectly to plan. But when you have to settle for field goals, which Florida State had a knack of doing in those days against Miami, when you had to settle for field goals, you end up losing the game.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. 1 for 10 on third downs. I mean, that tells a story right there. That's why they just settle for all those field goals, man. If you can't convert your third downs.
Well, and listen to the distances on the field goals, Gene, that he made. 25, 31, 20. So you had to kick a field goal.
You're all deep in the red zone on all those, yeah.
Yeah, you had to kick a field goal from the 8, from the 14, and from the 3. And then the other one was from the 17 that he missed.
Yeah.
So that's 4 times you got into the red zone where you got a total of 9 points. You can't beat good. Yep. It's hard to beat good teams like that.
Yeah. We know what happens there. All right, Corey. I'd say it's been a lot of fun. It's been memorable. Hasn't been a lot of fun going through this, kind of like getting an enema, but it has to be done, I guess.
Just cleanse it.
But thank you for your good work, Corey. And like I said, read Corey's write up on this. You get some more details on these games if you want to do it. We got some video clips up there as well to go back and do it. So I think the next time we meet Corey, it'll be under better circumstances. Let's talk about an FSU win or two, and give the fans what they want.
Our favorite blowouts, like our all-time favorite FSU blowouts.
Well, I think just right now, top of my head, I'm going to go Miami. What was the 47-0? What was that?
97. Yeah,
97 is this year. Yeah. So
the 88 Florida game, 52-17. That was
that's a Stan Shriver standing over the quarterback with this poster. Yep, that's a good one.
And that was always my dad's his pin code for the rest of his life. His was 52-17. So that tells you what kind of fan my dad was.
That's awesome.
Relished that.
I like the idea. That's not a bad one. Best FSU blowouts of all time. You got the Clemson 2013. That's a good one too. That's got to be up there, right?
2000. Clemson 93. Beat them 57-0. Let's just do our favorite Florida State blowouts of Clemson.
I like it. All right. Sounds good, Corey. Appreciate your good work. We'll talk to you soon, buddy.